For as long as humans have lifted their eyes to the night, Mars has glowed like a restless ember, close enough to feel familiar yet distant enough to remain untouchable. Ancient priests, wanderers, and sky watchers read omens in its ruddy shimmer, sensing that this world was more than a wandering star. And today, with all our telescopes, probes, and scientific bravado, the planet still carries the same quiet pull, a feeling that something waits beneath its windswept dust. Yet for a place declared empty, silent, and dead, Mars inspires an unusual amount of hesitation. NASA speaks of it with a curated confidence, offering polished explanations, cautious updates, and a surprising degree of restraint. Why would a barren planet require selective storytelling? Why does every revelation feel like a carefully measured breadcrumb? The silence is louder than the data. Our rovers send back images filtered, delayed, and dismissed before we can truly question them. Our missions return findings wrapped in reassuring language, as if the truth might be too disruptive to share. And the more we look, the more we sense that the official story is only one chapter of a much older narrative. Perhaps that is why Mars feels less like a destination and more like a threshold. Something in its silence unsettles, inviting us to wonder what lies behind the curtain of certainty. Because when a supposedly lifeless planet demands this much control, secrecy becomes the most revealing clue of all. And as we begin this journey, one truth becomes difficult to ignore. What we have been shown is not the whole story. It is merely the version we were meant to see, an introduction crafted to protect the deeper questions waiting beneath the Martian dust. And so, as we peel back the layers of official certainty, we will step into a landscape shaped by contradictions, whispered anomalies, and clues that refuse to stay buried. What NASA withholds may not be evidence of danger, but evidence of possibility. A possibility that Mars holds a forgotten chapter of our cosmic past, waiting for the moment humanity is finally ready to confront it. NASA presents itself as the pinnacle of scientific transparency, an agency built on open discoveries, public briefings, and dazzling images shared across the world. To most people, this polished facade is all they ever see. Smiling engineers, inspirational speeches, and carefully curated photographs of Martian landscapes that feel harmless and familiar. But behind this comforting surface lies a quieter history, one rarely acknowledged outside specialized circles. Over the decades, countless images have been withheld without explanation. Mission logs have appeared with sections mysteriously redacted, and official statements have shifted in ways that subtly contradict one another. Each inconsistency may seem small on its own, yet together they form a pattern that is difficult to dismiss. And this pattern invites an unsettling question, one NASA has never encouraged us to ask. If Mars is truly as lifeless and uneventful as we're told, why is so much information filtered before it ever reaches us? What are we not meant to see? Long before telescopes, rockets, or scientific equations, ancient civilizations studied Mars with an intensity that feels strangely deliberate. To the Babylonians, it was Nergal, the wandering omen of war whose movements they tracked with astonishing precision. Their clay tablets, carved by hand in flickering torchlight, record planetary cycles so accurate that modern astronomers still marvel at the consistency. Across the desert sands, Egyptian priests charted Mars from temple rooftops, weaving its strange red glow into rituals and mythologies. They treated the planet not as a distant curiosity, but as a presence, active, influential, and somehow aware. Far across the ocean, Mayan sky watchers traced the same reddish wanderer through dense jungle nights. Their codices map Mars's retrograde motion with a sophistication that seems impossible without advanced instruments. Yet they possessed none. How did they know so much? How did they measure what even our early modern scientists struggled to calculate? These cultures were separated by continents and centuries, yet their understanding converged on Mars with uncanny overlap. It was as if they inherited fragments of a deeper story, one that we have forgotten. Their legends speak of cosmic cycles, vanished ages, and visitors from the sky, slipping between symbolism and something that feels uncomfortably literal. And perhaps this is the real mystery. For our ancestors, Mars was not merely a red dot drifting through the heavens. It was a world of meaning, a world that demanded attention. Their precision suggests intention. Their fascination hints at memory. Maybe they saw something in the night sky that we no longer recognize. Or perhaps they remembered a truth humanity has since buried beneath the certainty of modern science. A truth waiting quietly on the desert sands of a nearby world. A truth that challenges everything we assume about our past and our cosmic origins as well. When Galileo first pointed a telescope toward Mars, the planet revealed little more than a blurry disk. But by the late 19th century, sharper lenses brought a startling new level of detail, and with it, controversy. Italian astronomer Giovanni Schiaparelli was among the first to sketch long, thin lines crisscrossing the Martian surface, features he called canali, meaning channels. In translation, however, the word took on a life of its own. English-speaking audiences transformed channels into canals, a term loaded with implication. Canals meant engineering. Canals meant intention. Enter Percival Lowell, a wealthy American astronomer whose imagination ignited at Schiaparelli's drawings. Lowell built an observatory specifically to study Mars, spending night after night tracing what he believed were the architectural remains of a dying but intelligent civilization. His sketches became famous, and suddenly the world stood on the edge of a tantalizing possibility. Perhaps we were not alone. But with rising enthusiasm came swift resistance. Prominent scientists dismissed Lowell's canals as illusions, artifacts of flawed optics and overactive imagination. Their rebuttals grew so forceful that the entire topic became taboo. What began as an exciting frontier of discovery devolved into a cautionary tale about the dangers of seeing too much. This moment marked the first modern shutdown of Martian curiosity, a pattern that feels eerily familiar. As NASA would later inherit the mantle of Mars exploration, it also inherited this culture of selective interpretation. Enthusiasm was replaced by caution, speculation by denial, and every anomaly became something to explain away rather than investigate. The Canal crisis didn't just reshape astronomy, it set the tone for every unanswered question that followed. When Viking 1 and 2 touched down on Mars in the mid-1970s, the world waited for simple confirmation. A barren landscape, a silent desert, a world as empty as scientists had predicted. But the first photographs that streamed back did not entirely match those expectations. Among the endless plains and weathered rocks were shapes that seemed too structured, too deliberate to dismiss at a glance. The cameras captured ridges arranged in surprising symmetry, edges that looked straight when nature favors curves, and formations that resembled fractured geometry rather than random erosion. And then came the image that would ignite decades of controversy, the so-called face on Mars, a massive mesa shaped uncannily like a human visage, complete with eyes, a nose, and a shadowed mouth. To the public, it looked unmistakably intentional. To the mission team, it created a sudden and uncomfortable dilemma. They could not simply deny what millions could clearly see with their own eyes. Behind closed doors, discussions grew tense. Some scientists suggested releasing multiple versions of the image to soften the shock. Others argued that acknowledging such a formation would unleash a storm of speculation they were unprepared to manage. The official explanation settled quickly on optical illusion, yet the unease lingered. Why did the surrounding terrain show similar hints of symmetry? Why did the scans capture angles and intersections that seemed so mathematically precise? These early anomalies planted seeds of doubt that could never be fully uprooted. Viking was meant to prove Mars was lifeless, yet its own photographs whispered a different possibility. A possibility wrapped not in myth or conjecture, but in pixels. And once those hints of artificiality appeared, they became impossible to unsee, reshaping the quiet tension surrounding every Martian mission that followed. In the aftermath of the Viking anomalies, NASA moved swiftly to contain the growing fascination. Almost every unusual formation, whether a clean geometric angle, a symmetrical ridge, or the haunting outline of the face, was dismissed under a single convenient label: pareidolia. The term describes the human tendency to see familiar shapes where none exist, and with one word, the agency reframed genuine curiosity as psychological mistake. It was an effective strategy. By declaring the anomalies illusions, NASA positioned itself as the guardian of rational thought and placed anyone who questioned the images on the fringe. But the speed of this dismissal raised subtle questions. If these shapes were truly meaningless, why rush to discredit them? Why not allow open investigation? Each rejection seemed less like scientific caution and more like narrative control, drawing a line between what counted as real data and what must be brushed aside as nonsense. The public was assured there was nothing to see, yet the certainty felt rehearsed, almost defensive. And beneath that defensiveness lingered an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps the danger was not in the anomalies themselves, but in what acknowledging them might lead us to ask. Among the instruments Viking carried to Mars, none was more ambitious than the labeled release experiment, designed to test whether Martian soil showed signs of active metabolism. When the first results came back, they sent a quiet shock through mission control. The samples produced a reaction, one that looked remarkably like the behavior of living microbes consuming nutrients. The data was repeatable and direct. For a moment, it seemed as though humanity had detected life on another world. But that moment did not last. Instead of embracing the possibility, NASA scientists split into opposing camps. Some argued that the reaction was unmistakably biological, pointing out that no known chemical process on Mars could fully explain the pattern. Others insisted there must be a non-living explanation, even if they could not identify one. The disagreement grew so intense that the results were eventually overshadowed by doubt, caution, and silence. Official statements downplayed the experiment, framing it as inconclusive. Later missions avoided repeating it, an omission that baffled researchers who believed the findings deserved deeper investigation. It was easier, it seemed, to label the result a fluke than to confront its implications. And so the contradiction took root. NASA maintained that Mars was sterile, yet Viking's own instruments had whispered a different story, one of activity beneath the dust. Whether the truth was buried out of fear, politics, or scientific pride, the outcome was the same. The mission that came closest to confirming life was reinterpreted until its most provocative discovery faded from view. As modern orbiters swept across the Martian surface with cameras far more powerful than anything Viking carried, a new generation of images began to reveal shapes that defy the quiet simplicity of a dead world. Among vast plains and ancient craters lie formations that look suspiciously structured. Geometric outlines etched into the dust as though remnants of something long forgotten. Polygonal patterns stretch across plateaus with a level of precision difficult to blame on random erosion. Right-angle intersections appear in regions where nature, especially on a wind-scoured planet, rarely chooses straight lines. Some images reveal dome-like protrusions rising from the regolith, nearly perfect in curvature, as if designed rather than formed. Others show rectangular depressions aligned in rows, their edges too sharply defined to ignore. When you look at them long enough, the shapes begin to resemble collapsed roofs, fractured walls, or the foundations of something once intentional. They carry a quiet, unsettling familiarity, the kind that makes you wonder if you're looking at ruins stripped bare by time. These anomalies have circulated among independent researchers for years, generating excitement on the outside and visible discomfort within the scientific establishment. NASA's official stance remains unwavering. The formations are natural, coincidences sculpted by volcanic activity or wind. Yet even seasoned geologists admit, often reluctantly, that some features challenge easy categorization. The patterns are too consistent, the symmetry too persistent, and the scale too deliberate to dismiss without hesitation. Still, the conversation rarely moves beyond polite skepticism. No mission is sent to investigate directly. No press briefing addresses the growing archive of inexplicable architecture-like shapes. It is as though acknowledging these features would unravel a truth the world is not prepared to confront. And so the images remain, floating between discovery and denial, waiting for someone brave enough to ask why a barren planet carries the silent echo of design. For decades, NASA insisted that Mars was bone dry, a frozen desert with no meaningful traces of water. Textbooks echoed the certainty, documentaries reinforced it, and the public learned to picture a world where moisture existed only as ancient rumor. Yet outside official circles, independent researchers were already pointing to strange gullies, sediment-like patterns, and mineral deposits that hinted at a far wetter past. Their claims were dismissed as speculative, unsupported, or premature. Then slowly and quietly, NASA's stance began to shift. First came the suggestion that water might have existed millions of years ago. Later, the cautious acknowledgement of ice beneath the surface. Eventually, the agency announced the presence of hydrated minerals, flowing brines, and frozen reservoirs large enough to reshape everything we thought we knew. What was once impossible became likely, then confirmed. A sequence of reversals that seemed less like evolving science and more like reluctant disclosure. The timing was telling. Each revelation arrived years after. Independent analysts had already raised the possibility. Each announcement sounded like the echo of a truth the agency could no longer ignore. And with every new admission, a larger implication crept closer to the surface. Where there is water, there can be life. Where there is habitability, there may be history. And where there is history, there may be secrets. This is the tension NASA cannot escape. Water transforms Mars from a dead world into a world of potential. Potential that challenges the official narrative. Because if water was always there, what else has been quietly waiting beneath the dust? Over the years, a quiet chorus of former mission engineers and imaging specialists has emerged. People who spent decades inside NASA's machinery only to hint, once retired or removed, that not everything the public sees reflects the full truth. They never speak recklessly. Their words are measured, cautious, wrapped in the kind of restraint that suggests far more sits behind their silence. Yet even in their caution, a similar theme appears again and again. There were images, readings, and signals that never made it into the official reports. Some engineers describe moments when data packets arrived showing shapes or textures that did not match expected geological patterns. They recall team leads quickly flagging certain images for internal review, after which those files seemed to vanish into classified archives. Imaging analysts talk about raw photographs that displayed anomalies, unexpected heat signatures, structured shadows, or objects that appeared and disappeared between frames, only to be replaced later with cleaner, less provocative versions. Nothing overt, Nothing dramatic, just subtle edits that nudged the narrative back towards certainty. Others mention atmospheric readings that suggested fleeting chemical signatures, compounds that shouldn't exist on a dead planet. These findings sparked brief, intense discussions behind closed doors, but were ultimately filed away under instrument error or non-repeatable. Officially, the anomalies never happened. Unofficially, they left lingering unease. None of these insiders claim Mars hosts intelligence. None present definitive proof. But their overlapping stories challenge the simplicity of NASA's public stance. They suggest a culture of quiet gatekeeping, where information is filtered not only for clarity but for control. And it raises an unsettling possibility. Perhaps the greatest secrets aren't buried beneath Martian soil, but within the archives of the people who went there to seek the truth. Over the years, a handful of astronauts, people who have seen Earth from above and felt the quiet weight of space, have let slip remarks that refuse to fade. Their words are never direct, never confrontational. Instead, they come as half-formed hints, cryptic reflections that seem to slip past the filters of official protocol. One veteran spoke of things out there that the public wouldn't understand, while another referred to anomalies we're briefed not to dwell on. These statements were quickly brushed aside as misinterpretations or casual exaggerations, yet the tone in their voices told a different story. Some astronauts describe moments when mission footage cut unexpectedly, or when certain visual feeds were monitored only by restricted teams. Others mention briefings that emphasized what not to discuss, environmental oddities, unexplained readings, or sightings that defied their training. They don't accuse, they imply, they don't reveal, they suggest. These are not wild storytellers or fringe theorists. They are disciplined professionals choosing their words with care. And it is that carefulness, that reluctance, that builds the tension. If there was truly nothing to hide, why speak as though there is? When we look at Mars today, we see a frozen wasteland. Its air thin, its soil lifeless, its horizon carved by storms that have raged for millions of years. But beneath that stillness lies evidence that refuses to align with the image of a planet that has always been dead. The landscape bears scars too dramatic to ignore. Colossal canyons stretching thousands of kilometers, riverbeds etched with the unmistakable signature of flowing water, and sedimentary layers that hint at ancient lakes and seas. These are not the markings of a world that never lived. They are the remnants of a world that once thrived. Scientists often attribute Mars's atmospheric collapse to natural processes, a fading magnetic field, relentless solar winds, geological exhaustion. Yet those explanations feel incomplete when confronted with the sheer scale of destruction. Something stripped Mars of its air with startling finality. Something transformed oceans into dust and left the planet's surface pitted with patterns that resemble abandoned infrastructure more than natural formation. Then there are the features that whisper of design, plateau edges that fall in perfect symmetry, hills arranged in geometric clusters and monolithic shapes that look eerily like toppled monuments. These aren't proofs but breadcrumbs, suggestive fragments scattered across a world that seems to be telling a story we've forgotten how to read. Taken together, these clues paint a picture both mesmerizing and unsettling. Mars may not have been merely habitable. It may have been inhabited. A civilization, perhaps ancient beyond our imagination, could have risen and vanished long before humanity learned to shape tools from stone. The barren planet we see now may be a graveyard, its secrets buried under red dust and time. If this possibility feels extreme, it is only because we have grown comfortable assuming we are the first intelligent species to touch this solar system. But Mars challenges that comfort. It presents a world that looks less like a failed planet and more like the ruins of something lost, a civilization wiped clean, leaving only whispers for anyone willing to listen. If Mars once hosted life, then its sudden transformation into a barren world demands an explanation. Some researchers point to natural catastrophes, massive solar flares that could have stripped the atmosphere in violent bursts, or asteroid impacts so powerful they reshaped entire regions of the planet. Others highlight strange chemical signatures detected by multiple probes, including traces that resemble the byproducts of intense nuclear reactions. These findings are controversial, dismissed by mainstream voices as coincidences or misinterpretations. Yet the patterns linger, too precise to ignore. What makes the puzzle more intriguing is the timing suggested by geological evidence. Mars didn't fade gradually. It changed abruptly as though something catastrophic swept across its surface. Dry riverbeds end as if cut short. Mineral layers show signs of sudden heating. Vast plains look scorched, not eroded. To some analysts, this resembles the aftermath of planetary devastation, not slow decay. The question that hangs in the air is simple but unsettling. Did NASA stumble upon clues that Mars suffered a civilization-ending event? And if so, is the reluctance to discuss these anomalies rooted in fear? Fear of what such a discovery would imply about our own future and about the fragile place of intelligent life in a volatile cosmos? If Mars truly holds traces of catastrophe, life, or even intelligence, the implications would stretch far beyond science. A revelation of that magnitude could unsettle global belief systems, rewrite history books, and ignite fierce political competition for a world suddenly seen as valuable rather than barren. For an agency tasked with maintaining stability and credibility, silence may feel safer than truth. Public panic is not an abstract concern, it is a calculated risk. Religious institutions could fracture, governments might scramble for control, and scientific foundations would be forced to confront questions they are not prepared to answer. So NASA speaks carefully, offering progress without provocation, data without disruption. The mysteries remain unaddressed not because they are irrelevant, but because acknowledging them would shift the balance of power and perception. And that leaves us with a lingering uncertainty. Is the silence simply caution, or is it strategy? As the rovers crawled across the Martian landscape, their cameras captured far more than dust, rock, and horizon. Scattered among the dunes and fractured cliffs were objects that seemed to resist easy explanation. Small, silent fragments that looked strangely out of place in a world declared empty. Some images revealed slivers of metallic sheen glinting beneath the red soil, as though shards of something once engineered had been worn down by time. Others showed stones shaped with uncanny precision, perfect cylinders, straight-edged blocks, and surfaces carved smooth in ways wind and sand rarely achieve on their own. One photograph displayed a coil-like structure half buried in sediment, its spiral pattern so deliberate it resembled the remains of a broken drill. Another showed a dark form jutting from the ground in the unmistakable outline of a fossil, ridges, curves, and segmentation that looked unsettlingly biological. Even seasoned analysts admitted off the record that nature seldom produces such symmetry without a guiding force. These objects were never labeled artifacts, never acknowledged as anything more than geological curiosities. Official reports described them as random formations, erosional tricks, or tricks of light. Yet the images linger. The shapes feel intentional, the textures too refined, the angles too precise. They evoke the sense of walking through ruins where every fragment hints at a story long erased. The rovers, in their slow and deliberate journey, became accidental archaeologists, capturing remnants that speak in whispers rather than declarations. Each strange object suggests possibility without confirming it, like clues left behind by a past we are not yet ready to name. And while NASA offers explanations meant to reassure us, the photographs themselves invite a quieter, more provocative question. What if Mars is not merely scattered with rocks, but with memories? Again and again, Curiosity's journey across Mars has been marked by sudden glitches. Brief, unexplained interruptions that always seem to occur at strangely convenient moments. Just as the rover approaches an unusual rock formation, the feed cuts. When its cameras sweep past an object that appears too smooth, too angular, the system reboots. When a shadow moves in a way that defies the static Martian landscape, the transmission freezes before resuming with a new angle, the anomaly conveniently out of frame. NASA attributes these events to software errors, radiation spikes, or simple technical fatigue, and perhaps that is true. Machines do fail. Code does falter. But the timing invites curiosity of its own. Why do these malfunctions cluster around the rover's most intriguing discoveries? Why do they occur precisely when the images raise questions rather than answers? The pattern doesn't prove anything, yet it refuses to be ignored. Signals are not supposed to behave like this. When the first faint radio patterns were detected around Mars, engineers assumed they were nothing more than static, random noise shaped by distance and interference. But as the data accumulated, a strange consistency emerged. The patterns repeated, paused, then returned with subtle shifts in frequency, almost like a kind of cosmic Morse code. Some signals came from probes orbiting the planet, others were picked up by Earth-based observatories scanning the Martian horizon. None matched known natural emissions. None fit with the predictable hum of machinery. Instead, they formed sequences that felt deliberate, as if an unseen hand was tapping on the two. Void. NASA acknowledged the readings only in passing, framing them as anomalies still under review. Yet independent analysts were far less restrained. They mapped the pulses, charted the frequencies, and found correlations that hinted at structure. Ratios and intervals rarely produced by chance. A few veteran radio astronomers even suggested that the signals behaved as if responding to the movement of orbiters, adjusting ever so slightly as the probes shifted position. Despite this, official channels fell quiet. Reports that once included raw spectrographs stopped publishing detailed breakdowns. Later missions referenced the signals only obliquely, describing them as environmental noise. But the silence itself became suspicious. If the patterns were meaningless, why withdraw the data? Why flatten the story into something unremarkable? Independent researchers continued listening. With each new recording, they found the same unsettling rhythm, the same sense of intention concealed beneath static. Whether the source was natural or engineered remained unresolved. But one truth grew clearer. Mars was not as quiet as we were told. Something out there was speaking in pulses, and the more we listened, the less accidental it seemed. And still the signals persist, waiting for someone to listen. The landers that touched down on Mars expected silence, a planet stripped of water, weather, and anything resembling a pulse. Yet beneath that stillness, their instruments detected something unusual. Faint rhythmic vibrations repeating with uncanny consistency. At first, these pulses were dismissed as mechanical quirks caused by temperature shifts or settling hardware. But as more recordings arrived, a pattern took shape. The rhythms were steady and unlike any known natural process. Seismometers registered pulses at intervals no geological model fully accounted for. Some appeared as soft subterranean thumps, others as resonant waves traveling farther than expected through Martian soil. Even stranger were the variations, tiny fluctuations in timing that hinted at responsiveness, as if the source adjusted with environmental changes. NASA labeled the phenomenon a planetary hum, a term that explained little and satisfied few. Independent analysts compared the data to seismic signatures and found discrepancies too persistent to ignore. The vibrations acted less like the chaotic murmurs of a dying world and more like structured emissions, patterned in ways that defied easy classification. No one asserts these signals are artificial, yet their mystery endures. Mars was supposed to be silent. Instead, it echoes with a heartbeat no one can fully explain. If Mars were proven to hold life, or worse, the ruins of an ancient intelligent species, the balance of global power would shift overnight. Every nation with a rocket program would scramble to stake a claim. Corporations would race to secure mining rights, resource maps, and technological advantages buried in Martian soil. Entire economies could pivot toward off-world exploitation, and whoever controlled Mars would control the future. This is the unspoken truth behind NASA's caution. A discovery so profound cannot be allowed to spark chaos, competition, or conflict before the world is prepared to handle it. Political leaders understand that a single announcement could trigger cascading consequences. Space treaties would collapse under pressure. Defense agencies would demand access to classified data. Questions of ownership, sovereignty, and responsibility would ignite debates capable of straining international alliances. Religious institutions might confront doctrines shaken by evidence of intelligence beyond Earth. Scientific communities would be forced to rewrite theories they once considered absolute. In such a volatile landscape, silence becomes a strategic choice. By controlling the narrative, NASA buys time. Time to research privately, to manage political tensions, to avoid a global scramble toward a world humanity is not ready to share. Public disclosure is not just a scientific matter, it is a geopolitical trigger. And until the implications can be managed, the simplest path is the quiet one. Reveal only the most harmless truths, and keep the rest locked away. In this light, the secrecy surrounding Mars begins to look less like caution and more like a calculated move in a vast ongoing game of cosmic chess, a game where the stakes are nothing less than the future of civilization. Beneath the scientific debates and political strategies lies a deeper, quieter fear: the fragility of the human story. For centuries, we have built our identity on the belief that humanity stands alone as the first and only intelligent species to rise within this solar system. But what happens if Mars proves otherwise? What happens if the ruins scattered across its surface belong to a civilization older, wiser, and far more ancient than our own? Such a revelation would do more than challenge textbooks. It would destabilize the psychological foundation on which societies are built. Cultures might question their origins, religions might struggle to adapt, and individuals could feel unmoored in a universe suddenly populated with ghosts of intelligence long extinct. Our sense of exceptionalism, the quiet pride that we are the pinnacle of creation, would erode. Institutions that depend on narrative continuity, governments, academies, faith communities, would face existential uncertainty. If humanity is not the beginning of the story, then our place in it becomes unclear. The timeline of civilization expands, and with it the unsettling possibility that intelligence is not unique but cyclical, rising and falling across cosmic ages. NASA understands this. So do the governments that oversee its missions. Protecting the human story means protecting stability, meaning, and identity. It means shielding society from truths that could fracture the collective psyche. And so the silence around Mars becomes more than strategy. It becomes preservation of order, of belief, and of the delicate narrative that holds our world together, even as the red planet hints at a past we may not yet be ready to face. In the end, Every mystery leads us not to answers but to thresholds. And Mars, more than any world we've ever reached for, feels like a threshold waiting in silence. We began this journey believing the red planet was a barren sphere of dust and stone, a world that simply existed beside our own. But the deeper we looked, the more we listened, questioned, and pieced together the fragments, the more Mars revealed itself not as an empty frontier, but as a lingering echo of something older than our understanding. The clues scattered across its surface are not conclusions, they are invitations. Every geometric ridge, every anomalous signal, every whispered vibration beneath the soil suggests a story that did not end, but was buried, waiting for someone curious enough to search for it. And now, with our instruments sharper and our questions bolder, we find ourselves standing in a moment unlike any before. Humanity is close enough to touch another world, yet far enough that the truth still slips between the cracks of certainty. Perhaps Mars is not a puzzle to solve quickly, but a memory that requires patience. A memory of a time when intelligence may have risen, flourished, and fallen long before we took our first steps. If so, then the silence we hear from NASA, from governments, from institutions may not be designed to hide fearsome truths, but to delay an inevitable revelation, one that would reshape what it means to be human. Because the real question is no longer what Mars is hiding. The real question is what we are prepared to understand. Are we ready to accept that life might not be unique? That civilizations may rise and vanish across cosmic ages? That our place in the universe is far more mysterious than we imagined? As we stand at the edge of the unknown, one truth becomes clear. Mars is not just a world we explore. It is a reminder that the universe is deeper, stranger, and far more ancient than our brief existence. And the greatest discoveries may still be waiting beneath the dust, quiet, patient, and timeless.